Coast Guard's HITRON unit calls itself the apex predator of maritime interdiction, and one look at this operation shows why. At 1000 hours somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, against smugglers running $42 million worth of contraband at breakneck speeds, the helicopter team had minutes to track their course, assess the threat, and decide whether to fire. The sequence that followed, warning, escalation, and finally disabling fire, was straight out of a playbook few people even know exists. But here's the bigger question. When does law enforcement cross the line into military action? How does a crew flying across the open ocean at 50 knots believe they're ghosts? To them, speed is armor, and the vast waters are cover. For years, smugglers running these same corridors trusted that distance and velocity would blunt enforcement. Radar sweeps didn't show them, and their vessels remained nameless dots on a sea with thousands of nameless dots. That confidence shaped their every move. Run wide, run fast, and by the time patrols caught wind, the load was gone. But belief doesn't change physics, and it doesn't hide against the right eye in the sky. From 20,000 feet, the HC-130J Super Hercules lingers longer than any cutter. Inside its fuselage sits the AN/APS-154 radar, sweeping a radius of nearly 200 miles. The screen fills with returns, cargo ships moving slow and steady, tankers shifting lanes, specks flickering at the edge of signal. It's within that clutter the unusual track appears. The course skirts shipping lanes. The track runs jagged, making sudden angular shifts. And then the data point that triggers immediate focus. Nearly 50 knots sustained speed against swells that force fishing trawlers to crawl half that. Operators mark the target and begin persistent surveillance. High above the endless blue, the Hercules doesn't just watch from radar alone. Mounted on its systems is the Star Sapphire 380 HDC, a stabilized electro-optical sensor able to capture details across miles of humid air. It crosslocks and zooms. What once was only a moving dash of data becomes a hull pattern, then the shimmer of spray, then the precise count of engines bolted onto the stern. 4 outboards, uncovered, running flat out. Eyes scan further. On the open deck, tarps stretch awkwardly over bundled cargo. Crew movements do not match fishermen handling nets. They move more like watchmen, scanning horizons, keeping heads low each time the vessel veers. Each observation builds the case. Federal interdiction protocol demands criteria: unnatural speed, absence of an AIS transponder, deviation away from normal trade routes. Box after box ticks red, and each pass of the sensor confirms it. Still, direct launch of an engagement requires clarity. Watching alone, analysts must identify beyond suspicion. So they hold position, continuously zooming and refocusing the camera to ensure no simple mistake. The smugglers, meanwhile, redirect. A correction in course suggests a waypoint. Perhaps a mothership further up route, perhaps a swap at sea. To the crew crouched behind tarps, this all still feels invisible, as if water and horizon swallows them against any eye. They lean into the throttle, convinced that nightfall or distance will erase anyone watching. But nothing is erased. Their track is pinned digitally. Their hull is captured in high definition at every bearing. Each wave they cut, each adjustment on the wheel, is being logged in real time. There is no longer invisibility, there is transparency, even if the crew has no idea. And for the Coast Guard, staring at screens 300 miles out, watching isn't enough. Stopping them will demand a chase at speeds most surface ships cannot touch. So how do you stop a boat sprinting 50 knots across open water without sinking it, or risking the lives of your own boarding team? That challenge falls to a unit unlike any other in the world. the Coast Guard's helicopter interdiction tactical squadron, or HITRON. Since the late 90s, this squadron has been the only airborne law enforcement team authorized to use live gunfire during international drug interdictions. More than 500 go-fast boats have faced them, and almost all ended the same way. Engines silent, crews under guard, and millions in drugs stripped from cartel supply chains. But precision like this is not simple. Imagine a helicopter racing forward at close to 50 knots and holding steady just 100 feet above the waves. Now imagine the go-fast boat ahead, slicing through 6-foot swells at the same speed, pivoting side to side to throw off aim. The gunner has seconds, each shot affected by the changing angle of two moving craft, crosswinds, and the bounce of the ocean below. The margin for error is razor thin. A stray round could strike crew, detonate fuel tanks, or sink the vessel, destroying not only evidence, but also lives. The process begins with warnings. A long-range acoustic device projects commands in Spanish, demanding the crew stop. The roar of 4 Mercury outboards drowns it out. Next, the M240B machine gun fires short controlled bursts across the bow, the flashes in the water unmistakable. The smugglers refuse to slow. Only then does the gunner unshoulder the Barrett M 107.50 caliber rifle, a 30-pound weapon firing rounds at nearly 2,800 feet per second. These rounds carry over 11,000 foot-pounds of energy, enough to smash through the solid aluminum engine blocks without puncturing the hull itself. The sequence is always deliberate. Using a holographic sight paired with an infrared laser, the gunner centers on the starboard outer engine. A single shot cracks, and instantly one motor seizes. The boat jolts, speed dropping to 38 knots. The second shot claims another outboard, forcing the craft down to 25. A third hit drives them below 15. The final round disables the last engine cluster, leaving the boat clawing at 12 knots before stalling out completely. What was once a blur across the ocean is now a powerless hulk wallowing in its own wake. The entire engagement takes less than 60 seconds. That level of precision does not come without years of practice. Only the top Coast Guard shooters even qualify for HITRON selection. Those chosen will expend 5,000 rounds in training cycles, firing from helicopters against moving targets while instructors replicate harsh conditions. Winds gusting 20 knots, seas rolling 6 feet, targets darting and pitching at odd angles. A fire team may repeat the same drill hundreds of times until muscle memory takes over and instinct corrects for motion they cannot consciously track. By the time they deploy, each gunner knows exactly how to hold steady against chaos. And so, when the last engine falls silent, there is no firefight and no casualties. The smugglers sit stranded on a boat that can no longer run. Their chase ended long before they realize what has happened. Yet even with this surgical level of control, one question still lingers. Was firing lethal rounds at unarmed traffickers within the bounds of the law? The engines are silent, the smugglers under guard, but was unleashing .50 caliber rounds at unarmed traffickers a line crossed in international waters? This is where the operation shifts from tactics to law, and the clarity seen through sensors and rifles fades into the murk of treaties and interpretations. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, grants states power to interdict vessels carrying illicit cargo. Yet the same framework stresses restraint, urging that enforcement rely on non-lethal means whenever possible. A helicopter firing armor-piercing rounds into 4 engines does not easily fit that guidance. Supporters of the Coast Guard's methods argue necessity. Go-fasts will not stop unless forced, and chasing them with cutters often fails before it even begins. but critics counter that the measures are out of scale. Heavy caliber fire against crews that pose no immediate threat may violate the proportionality principle at the core of international law. Here lies the contradiction. One side sees operational efficiency and deterrence, while another sees lethal methods deployed where warning and maneuver could suffice. The United States contends these engagements are not acts of war, but law enforcement actions. Still, international experts question that framing. Article 2.4 of the United Nations Charter bars nations from using force against other states, with Article 51 permitting self-defense when attacked. But here there was no state aggressor, only traffickers. The debate centers on whether drug smugglers can trigger such force exceptions, and lawyers remain divided. Trinity College professor Michael Becker remarked that the U.S. is not engaged in an armed conflict with Venezuela or with groups like Tren de Aragua. If true, then these killings do not fall under wartime authority at all. Domestic law does little to clear the picture. The 2001 authorization for use of military force was created to pursue the perpetrators of the September 11th attacks, not cartel groups moving cocaine through the Caribbean. Some administrations lean on Article 2 of the Constitution, citing presidential authority to act against threats abroad. Yet many legal experts consider that justification stretched beyond its design. If every smuggling run can be framed as a trigger for lethal force, the gap between police work and combat missions collapses. Even the U.S. decision to label Tren de Aragua a foreign terrorist organization does not resolve matters. Queen's University professor Luke Moffett warned that naming individuals as terrorists does not make them lawful targets, and doing so risks bypassing limits set by international law. Notre Dame professor Mary Ellen O'Connell added that intentional killing outside of armed conflict is illegal unless it saves a life immediately. This squares poorly with engine disablement strikes where crews posed no direct danger to others at sea. The BBC noted that some legal scholars now see these interdictions as potentially unlawful under jus ad bellum, the body of law governing the use of force. The boarding looks precise, almost clinical policing, but beneath that exterior sits a legal gray zone where military-style firepower presses past clear borders. The smuggler's boat may be gone, burned and abandoned, but what lingers is a far more combustible debate. How far should the reach of enforcement stretch when the sea itself has no boundaries? On the surface, the operation looks flawless. Engines disabled without injury, a cartel crew detained, and millions in narcotics denied shipment. Yet underneath sits a far more complex reality, where law enforcement tools and military firepower blur into the same frame. Today, it is a go-fast vessel stacked with contraband. Tomorrow, that precedent could justify targeting groups far different from traffickers. The Coast Guard proves every time that no cartel outruns them. But the deeper question hangs unresolved. Can legal frameworks keep pace with tactics designed for combat when applied across waters that belong to no single nation?